Hi, everyone. Dr. Carter here, outside at a beautiful, if not a little windy day on campus. And I'm outside because, we've been studying these transcendentalists, and I realized that all the videos I've been sending to you um, have been talking about how Emily Dickinson was a recluse and that we're inside and what have you, but she would have been aware of the Romantic tradition. And then the week before, were talking about Thoreau and Emerson and connecting with nature, but we did everything from the classroom, okay? And now maybe you're doing everything from your bedroom or your couch. And I thought, as we move into talking about Walt Whitman, for the longest time, America's poet of poets, we really do need to try to get outside. Not that Whitman was 100% a romantic poet, but he did embrace nature with a big N, and romanticism with a big R to some degree, but he was also sort of a romantic with a little r in that he was a humanist. He may not have necessarily believed everything that Emerson and Thoreau believed, but he definitely believed in this idea of a celestial, universal connection with other folks. Another thing that he shared with Emerson was this desire to situate America as its own place, no longer a little stepchild or a stepbrother or sister of all these other European nations, but its own unique place with its own unique cultures and its own unique people. All right, so the Romantics and Whitman were trying to say, hey, we have been here long enough. We have established our own literature, our own politics, our own ideas. And he wanted to celebrate not just the universality of all things, but particularly the interconnectedness of Americans. And so today I'm going to talk to you about the 1855 edition of his collection of poetry, Leaves of Grass. And I'm simply going to go from the textbook here. So if you get a chance to look at the textbook that we've been using, it'll start on page 440. And I want to read what it says about the background here, and then we'll talk about things a little bit after I read the preface to the 1855 edition of Leaves of Grass. You'll notice 1855 is, of course, 10 years before the Civil War. It's important for you to note, if you haven't looked at the other resources already, that Whitman acted as sort of a nurse during the Civil War and was affected greatly by the experiences that he had. And so, unlike Emerson and Thoreau, he had some truly gritty, harrowing life experiences. I mean, Thoreau went and lived the woods for a couple of years, but he didn't necessarily see people blowing up or limbs removed and that sort of stuff. Um, and so we have this combination of big R and little r romanticism and humanism, also tempered with the realism, the realities that Whitman would have seen once he was involved in the Civil War. So this is another way in which we see Whitman, along with Dickinson, as sort of a transition from the Romantics to the realists, and also even to the modernists in terms of how they deal with notions of truth and life and other big things. All right, but let's see what our text tells us about Leaves of Grass, 1855, preface to that edition. It says, in his lifetime, Whitman's poetry, which broke traditional rules of rhythm and rhyme, much like Dickinson's, provoked both glowing reviews and fiercely negative reactions. After receiving his complimentary copy of Leaves of Grass, Ralph Waldo Emerson had abundant praise for this poet, which is true. In a letter to Whitman, Emerson wrote, I give you joy of your free and brave thoughts. I have great joy in it. I find incomparable things said incomparably well as they must be. I find the courage of treatment which so delights me and which large perception only can inspire. I greet you at the beginning of a great career. All right. So Emerson liked that Whitman was abandoning rhyme scheme, all right, that he was embracing free verse, that he didn't necessarily feel like his poems had to fit into a lyric or sonnet or other type of format, okay? Unfortunately, not everyone liked that, and so they considered his poetry sort of lowbrow, all right, and sometimes even obscene. But Emerson recognized that there was something great here. Of course, the preface of Leaves of Grass is not poetry, it's prose, but let's see what he has to say about the American identity Whitman does in this preface. America does not repel the past or what it has produced under its form or amid other politics or the idea of castes or the old religions. Right? So America is a place where we do things our own way, in new ways, accepts the lesson with calmness, is not so impatient as has been supposed that the slough still sticks to opinions and manners and literature, while the life which served its requirements has passed into the new life of the new forms, perceives that the corpse is slowly born from the eating and sleeping rooms of the house, perceives that it waits a little while in the door, that it was finished for all its days, that its action has descended to the stalwart and well-shaped heir who approaches, and that he shall be finished for his days. So even in the prose here, we're seeing something that Whitman loves to do, and that's list, or what we call cataloging, okay? And so there's sort of anaphora or a poetic repetition in a lot of his poems. We see it in the prose here as well. All right, the same sort of listing of items and the same sort of language over and over again, such that it feels like you've got a list. But basically, he's saying, hey, America is a land of novelty. We may have come from the old world, but we've seen the mistakes of the old world, and we're doing things our new way, and we've learned from the mistakes of the past. He continues, the Americans of all nations at any time upon the earth have probably the fullest poetical nature. And I love that he's already speaking to this idea of the diversities of diversities in American culture. Now, he may not have ever lived to see what we experience now in terms of our plurality and pluralism, but he was sort of pushing for that and would have liked to have seen it. The United States themselves are essentially the greatest poem. That's pretty high praise. In the history of the earth, hitherto, the largest and most stirring appear tame and orderly to their ampler largeness and stir. All right, so we make everything that's come before us seem tame and timid, all right, with our energy and our drive. Here at last is something in the doings of man that corresponds with the broadcast doings of the day and night. Here is not merely a nation, but a teeming nation of nations. Here is action untied from strings, necessarily blind to particulars and details, magnificently moving in vast masses. Here is the hospitality which forever indicates heroes. Here, 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 here. Here are the ruffs and beards and space and ruggedness of nonchalance that the soul loves. Here, the performance disdaining the trivial, unapproached, and the tremendous audacity of its crowds and groupings, and the push of its perspective spreads with crampless and flowing breath and showers its prolific and splendid extravagance. One sees it must indeed own the riches of the summer and winter, and need never be bankrupt while corn grows from the ground, or the orchards drop apples, or the bay contains fish, or men beget children upon women. So America as a special place connected to all of the history that came before it, but also eking out its own place in history, creating its own norms, unafraid of new things. Of course, a little bit of irony here in that Leaves of Grass was not particularly universally loved when it came out, because many of those who like the sort of old school notions of poetry were afraid of new things. But still, this notion of pages or leaves, okay, of paper, of poems, from someone who is not afraid to innovate and doesn't see himself as different in terms of what he's trying to do, but essentially American in sort of the things he's trying to do. He's essentially trying to say, hey, this is what I think of America, and then I'm trying to live my vision of it through my poetry. Please embrace it and know that while I think, all Americans are special and unique and exciting, and that this is an exciting time to be in this country that is really coming into its own. You too are leaves of grass with your own individual, all right, strengths and connection to this land and to this country. So let's work on this. Read my poetry, enjoy it. This American vision, let's work on it together. You, me, we're all connected. All right. And so, if you see something you don't like, just go on to the next page, just a different leaf. All right. So maybe he's not necessarily setting himself up for the criticism that he got. I think he would have liked to have been appreciated. All right. But he was saying, I know I'm doing things differently, but that is what America does. All right, more on Whitman later. Bye-bye.